A grieving single-father janitor offered his last warm tea to a cold, powerful CEO, unaware she was a broken-hearted widow who had vowed never to love again. Clean the spill, and do not, under any circumstances, make eye contact with the executives. The biting cold of the November wind seeped through the polished glass of the skyscraper, a relentless whisper of the city's vast and uncaring indifference. Leo pushed his mop across the gleaming marble floor of the lobby, his own reflection a weary, threadbare ghost trailing behind him in the amber hue of the emergency lighting. He was so tired. The exhaustion was a physical weight, settling deep in his bones, a hollow ache that mirrored the hollow space in his wallet and the even more hollow space in his heart where his wife's laughter used to be. His worn uniform, several shades too pale from countless washings, felt thin against the chill that even the building's state-of-the-art heating system couldn't fully banish. He moved with a quiet, dignified rhythm, the soft swish of the mop the only sound in the cavernous, sterile silence of the corporate cathedral. It was long after midnight, a time when the building was supposed to be empty, a ghost ship of steel and glass sailing through the dark ocean of the city night. But she was still here. He knew she was still here. On the 44th floor, the penthouse office, a single square of light always burned, a lonely star in the skyscraper's private constellation. Ms. Isabella Vance, the CEO, the Ice Queen, the other janitors called her. A woman whose face, seen only in polished corporate photos in the lobby, was impeccable and commanding, her eyes holding a look of such profound distance it felt like a physical barrier. He had never seen her in person, not really, just a fleeting glimpse of a sleek black car vanishing into the private garage, or the whisper of her name spoken in tones of fear and awe by the daytime staff. He kept his head down, focusing on the rhythmic work that allowed his mind to drift to the one thing that mattered, the one light that hadn't gone out in his world. Lily, his daughter, her small, fragile face, pale against the hospital pillows, her breathing a soft, shallow whisper that terrified him more than any shout ever could. The doctors used words he didn't understand but whose cost he understood all too well. Each swish of his mop was a prayer, a desperate plea to the universe to keep her safe, to give him the strength to keep going for one more day, one more shift, one more bill. He clutched the worn handle, his knuckles white. He would not falter. The sterile silence of the 44th floor was Isabella Vance's sanctuary, a fortress she had built around a shattered heart. The heavy fog of the city night pressed against the panoramic windows, blurring the glittering lights into a distant, impersonal smear, a perfect reflection of how she saw the world. She stared at the spreadsheet on her triple-monitor display, the numbers crisp and clean, but her gaze was unfocused, seeing instead the fractured image of a different night, the unbearable screech of tires on wet pavement, the splintered glass that shimmered like cruel diamonds in the flashing lights of the ambulance. A raw, physical pain clenched in her chest, so familiar it was almost a part of her. It had been 3 years since the accident, 3 years since her world had vanished in a single seismic moment, taking her husband, Michael, and their 5-year-old son, Noah. After that, she had rebuilt her life with the only materials she had left: work, ambition, and an impenetrable wall of ice. On her ornate, polished mahogany desk, next to a photo frame turned pointedly face down, sat a small, gleaming silver plaque. It was her mantra, her creed, her warning to the world and to herself. Sentiment is a liability. Focus is an asset. Love was a weakness she could not afford, a risk that had already cost her everything. So she worked. She worked until her eyes burned and the numbers blurred into nonsense, until the grief was a dull thud instead of a sharp, stabbing blade. She worked to forget the sound of Noah's laughter, the warm weight of his head on her shoulder, the gentle touch of Michael's hand on her back. She worked because in the commanding quiet of her office, in the sterile world of assets and acquisitions, there was no room for the ghosts that haunted her every waking moment. A tremor ran through her hand as she reached for her coffee cup, and she found it empty and cold. A quiet, brittle sigh escaped her lips, a sound of such profound weariness that it seemed to echo in the cavernous space. She was so terribly cold. Leo finished the lobby and began his slow ascent, floor by gleaming, empty floor. His stomach rumbled softly, a reminder that the half sandwich he'd eaten hours ago was long gone. All he had was the small, dented thermos in his bag, filled with the chamomile tea he'd brewed before his shift. It was his one small comfort, a warm, fragrant ritual that reminded him of his wife, who had always insisted it helped with sleep she knew he never got enough of. As he stepped out of the service elevator onto the 44th floor, he froze. The heavy glass door to the CEO's office was slightly ajar, and through the gap, he could see her. Not the powerful icon from the photos, but a woman. She was slumped in her ornate leather chair, her impeccable suit jacket draped over the back, her shoulders trembling almost imperceptibly. One hand was pressed to her forehead, her face pale under the harsh light of her desk lamp. She looked fragile, shattered, and utterly, desperately alone. The sight struck a chord deep within him, a tender, unspoken recognition of pain. He had seen that same haunted look in his own reflection too many times. He knew that brand of silence, the kind that screamed with unspoken grief. His first instinct, ingrained by rules and fear, was to back away, to vanish back into the shadows where he belonged. He was the janitor. He was invisible. But then he thought of his wife, her unwavering kindness to strangers, her belief that a small act of warmth could change a day. He looked at the powerful CEO, stripped of her armor, and saw not a boss, but a soul in pain, a fellow traveler in the lonely landscape of loss. His heart, worn and weary as it was, made a decision. It was a risk, a stupid risk. He could lose his job, the one thing standing between Lily and total disaster. But he couldn't just walk away. It wasn't in him. He hesitated for only a second more. With a deep breath, Leo quietly retreated. From his worn bag, he pulled out his thermos of still warm tea and a small, neatly folded blanket he always kept with him. An old baby blanket of Lily's, soft and threadbare, for cold nights on the bus. He took a receipt from his pocket and scribbled on the back with a stub of a pencil. His hands, rough and calloused from work, moved with a gentle precision. He crept back to her office door, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He didn't dare go in, didn't dare break the sacred silence of her solitude. He placed the thermos and the folded blanket on the polished floor just outside her door, propping the small note against the thermos so she would see it. Then, as quietly as a shadow, he slipped back into the service elevator and was gone. Inside her office, Isabella finally lifted her head, the wave of grief receding, leaving her hollow and drained. As she stood up, her joints aching from the cold, her eyes caught the unexpected shapes outside her door. She faltered. She slowly walked over, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. A dented, cheap thermos, a small, worn-looking blanket, and a note, written in simple, clean handwriting on the back of a grocery store receipt. She picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly. The note was only 5 words long. Everyone needs warmth. Hope this helps. She stared at the words, and something inside her, something that had been frozen solid for 3 long years, cracked. She uncapped the thermos. The gentle, fragrant steam of chamomile rose to meet her. A scent from a life she thought she had forgotten. A life of simple, tender comforts. A sob caught in her throat, a raw, unfamiliar sound. She didn't know it yet, but that small, selfless act of kindness from an invisible stranger was not just a gesture. It was a lifeline. The next morning, the world had shifted on its axis, though only Isabella Vance knew it. She had spent the night in her office, wrapped in the impossibly soft, threadbare blanket, the taste of the warm, sincere tea still on her lips. It was the first time in 3 years she had slept without the aid of a pill, and the first time she had woken up without the immediate crushing weight of despair. A fragile, unfamiliar emotion flickered within her. Curiosity. Who would do such a thing? Who, in this ruthless, transactional world, would give their own small comfort to a stranger, expecting nothing in return? The act was so pure, so selfless, it felt like a message from another universe. The first thing she did upon arriving at her office, after instructing her assistant to hold all calls, was request the security footage from the 44th floor corridor from the previous night. She watched the grainy, black and white footage, her heart thudding in a slow, heavy rhythm. She saw herself, a ghostly figure of misery at her desk. And then, she saw him, a janitor, his face weary but his movements gentle. She watched him hesitate, then retreat, then return to place the items by her door with an almost sacred care. She zoomed in on his face, a face she'd never noticed before, and saw a quiet dignity, a profound sadness in his eyes that she recognized instantly. She saw a fellow soul who understood loss. She felt an undeniable, seismic pull to find this man, to understand the source of his gentle strength. A new purpose began to dawn. She called security. "Get me the name of the janitor who cleaned the executive floor last night," she said, her voice crisp and commanding. There was a pause. "That would be Leo Martinez, Ms. Vance," the head of security replied. "However, my records show his employment was terminated this morning." Isabella froze. The words echoed in the sterile silence of her office. "Terminated? On what grounds?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Mr. Thorne in acquisitions reported him for unauthorized lingering near your office late last night. He claimed it was a security breach. It was processed an hour ago." Marcus Thorne. Of course. Thorne was a man carved from the same cold marble as the lobby, an executive whose ambition was matched only by his cruelty and his disdain for anyone he deemed beneath him. A biting, cold fury, an emotion she hadn't felt with such intensity in years, surged through Isabella. She saw it all with sickening clarity. Thorne, seeing the janitor near her office, had assumed the worst and, in an act of sycophantic malice, had him fired to protect her. He had snuffed out this one small light of human decency to score points. The injustice of it was unbearable. Leo had performed an act of profound kindness, and his reward was unemployment. He had reached out to her in her darkest moment, and the machinery of her own company had crushed him for it. She felt a surge of responsibility so powerful it left her breathless. This was her fault. Her world, her rules had done this to him. The fragile curiosity she'd felt had now hardened into a fierce, unwavering resolve. She would find him, and she would make this right. Meanwhile, Leo stood on a windswept street corner, the termination slip a brittle, crumpled piece of paper in his trembling hand. The words unauthorized lingering swam before his eyes. He had been fired. Just like that. No questions, no warning. The security guard had been almost apologetic, handing him his final, meager paycheck. He had tried to explain, but the decision was already made, handed down from on high. Despair, cold and heavy, settled over him like a shroud. This job, as grueling and thankless as it was, had been his only lifeline. It was the only thing paying for Lily's medicine, for the roof over their heads, for the food on their table. Now it was gone. All because of a moment of foolish, impulsive kindness. He had reached out, and the world had slapped his hand away. He thought of Lily, her innocent, trusting face. How could he tell her? The weight of his failure was a physical stone in his chest. He looked up at the Vance Tower, a gleaming, impersonal spear of glass and steel piercing the heavy gray sky. To that building, to the powerful people inside, he was less than nothing. A piece of dust to be swept away without a second thought. The brief, unspoken connection he'd felt with the lonely woman in the tower now felt like a cruel joke. He was an idiot. He was a fool. There was no kindness in this world. There was only power, and he had none. Isabella Vance moved with the swift, lethal precision that had made her a titan of industry. She didn't just want to fix the problem. She wanted to understand it. She bypassed her own HR department, knowing they would only give her a sanitized version of events. Instead, she used her private resources, hiring an investigator to compile a complete, confidential file on Leo Martinez. The report that landed on her desk less than 24 hours later was a testament to quiet, dignified suffering. It detailed the loss of his wife to cancer 2 years prior. It documented his subsequent financial spiral, the mountain of medical debt she had left behind. And most wrenchingly, It detailed the current plight of his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, who was battling a severe respiratory condition that required expensive, ongoing treatment. His job as a janitor, the report concluded, was the only thing keeping them afloat. Reading it, Isabella felt the last of her icy armor splinter and fall away. This man, who had every reason to be bitter and broken, who was carrying a burden that would have crushed most people, had still found it in his heart to offer his last bit of warmth to a stranger. To her, his kindness wasn't just a simple act. It was an act of profound, almost impossible grace. It was a light in the suffocating darkness of her own cynicism. She felt a deep, unshakable shame for the world she had built, a world that could discard a man like Leo without a thought. And so, her secret intervention began. It started with a single, anonymous wire transfer. The head of the pediatric hospital received a call from a philanthropic fund, informing him that an anonymous corporate donor had cleared the entirety of Lily Martinez's outstanding medical bills and had, in fact, established a trust to cover all her future treatments, indefinitely. When the hospital administrator called a stunned and disbelieving Leo to deliver the news, he could only weep, convinced it was some kind of divine miracle. He had been praying for a lifeline, and the universe had sent him an ocean. He had no idea the miracle had a name, and that her office overlooked the very city that had felt so cold and hostile just days before. Isabella's intervention didn't stop there. Using a shell corporation, she bought the delinquent mortgage on his small, run-down apartment, immediately forgiving the debt and transferring the deed to his name. An unmarked van delivered a year's supply of groceries to his doorstep, along with new, warm clothes for both him and Lily. To Leo, it felt as if angels were working in the shadows, repairing the shattered pieces of his life. The desperation that had been his constant companion began to recede, replaced by a fragile, tentative hope. He found a new job, volunteering at a local soup kitchen, feeling an overwhelming need to pay forward the incredible, mysterious kindness he had been shown. He needed to be a source of warmth in the world, just as someone had been for him. But for Isabella, it wasn't enough. These anonymous acts were a salve for her conscience, but they did nothing to bridge the chasm between her world and his. She felt an obsessive need to see him again, to speak to him, to understand the man behind the gesture that had reawakened her own dormant heart. She found him serving soup to the city's forgotten people, a gentle smile on his weary face. He moved with the same quiet grace she'd seen on the security footage, his eyes filled with a sincere warmth that seemed to touch everyone he served. She stood in the line, dressed down in a simple coat and scarf, her heart pounding like a drum. When it was her turn, he looked up, and for a moment, his eyes showed a flicker of confusion, a vague sense of recognition he couldn't quite place. He ladled soup into her bowl. "It's cold out there," he said, his voice soft and kind. "I hope this helps." The words, so similar to the ones on his note, struck her with the force of a physical blow. A lump formed in her throat. She could only nod, unable to speak. She took the bowl and sat at a corner table, watching him. She knew this was the moment for reconnection, for the beginning of their true bonding. She had to talk to him, not as a CEO, but as the woman to whom he had shown such compassion. She waited until his shift was over, finding him wiping down tables in the now empty dining hall. The soft hush of the room felt worlds away from the sterile silence of her office. "Mr. Martinez," she said, her voice softer than she intended. He turned, startled, and this time, recognition dawned clearly in his eyes. He remembered her face from the corporate photos in the lobby of his old job. He stiffened, a flicker of fear and confusion crossing his features. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" She took a step closer, her hands clenched in her coat pockets. "I came to thank you," she said, her voice raw with an unspoken emotion. For the tea. Leo stared at her, his mind reeling. The tea. He had been fired for that. How could she possibly be here, thanking him for the very act that had cost him his job? The pieces didn't fit. I don't understand," he faltered. "You were fired because of a cruel, ambitious man," she explained, her gaze unwavering. Not because of me. What you did that night. I can't explain what it meant. I was in a very dark place. Your kindness. It was like a light. Her confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and sincere. Leo saw past the CEO, past the power and the wealth, and saw the same profound sadness he had seen through the crack in her office door. He saw the woman. He nodded slowly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He offered her a seat, and in the quiet, humble setting of the soup kitchen, they began to talk. This was their first true confession scene. He spoke of his wife, of the vibrant, loving woman she was, and the gaping hole her absence had left in his and Lily's lives. He spoke with a quiet, heartbreaking dignity, not asking for pity, but simply sharing the truth of his grief. Isabella listened, her eyes steady and filled with an empathy she thought she had lost. She didn't offer empty platitudes or hollow condolences. Instead, when he was finished, she simply said, "Thank you for telling me about her." Then, taking a deep, shuddering breath, she reciprocated. She told him about Michael and Noah. She spoke of the car accident, the details of which she hadn't uttered aloud to another soul in 3 years. The words came out, brittle and cracked at first, then flowing in a cathartic release of unbearable pain. She told him about the guilt, the loneliness, the decision to close her heart off forever because feeling anything was too much to bear. She spoke of the empty mansion, the silent rooms, the ghost of a child's laughter that haunted every corner. Leo listened, his expression one of pure, unwavering compassion. He saw the fortress she had built around herself and understood, finally, the profound wound it was meant to protect. When she fell silent, tears glistening in her eyes, he didn't reach for her hand or offer a hug. He did something far more meaningful. He stood up, went to the kitchen, and came back with 2 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. He placed one in front of her, a simple, gentle gesture that said everything. They sat in a comfortable, shared silence, 2 survivors of life's cruelest storms, forging a sacred, unspoken bond over shared tragedy and warm tea. Their connection deepened over the following weeks. Isabella found herself creating excuses to visit the soup kitchen, sometimes bringing donations of high-quality food from exclusive restaurants, other times just showing up to sit and talk with Leo after his shift. He, in turn, began to see beyond the formidable CEO and discovered the witty, wounded, and fiercely intelligent woman underneath. He told her about Lily, about her resilience and her bright spirit, and Isabella would listen, a soft, tender expression on her face. A fragile hope began to bloom in the barren landscape of their hearts. But the world they inhabited was not built for such gentle things. Isabella's company was hosting its annual charity gala, a lavish affair designed to showcase corporate philanthropy. It was the social and business event of the season, and as CEO, her presence was mandatory. Unbeknownst to her, the catering company that Leo had recently started working for was hired for the event. And Marcus Thorne, the man who had fired Leo, was set to receive a major promotion at the gala, a reward for his ruthless efficiency. The stage was set for the climax, a public collision of their 2 worlds. The night of the gala, the grand ballroom was a sea of gleaming jewels and crisp tuxedos. The air buzzed with polite chatter and the clinking of champagne glasses. Leo, dressed in a stark white catering uniform, moved through the crowd with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, his face a mask of professional invisibility. He felt out of place, a ghost from another life haunting the edges of this opulent spectacle. Then he saw her. Isabella was standing across the room, a vision in a simple but impeccably tailored black gown. She looked stately, powerful, and completely alone in the crowd. Their eyes met for a brief, electric moment, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. But the moment was shattered by a sneering, familiar voice. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in." It was Marcus Thorne, his face a mask of smug contempt. He looked Leo up and down, his eyes lingering on the catering uniform with disdain. "Crawling your way back in, Martinez? I thought I had the trash taken out." Leo stood his ground, his expression calm, his dignity an unshakable shield. "I'm just doing my job, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice quiet and steady. Thorne laughed, a short, ugly sound. He raised his voice, drawing the attention of the surrounding guests. This man, he announced, gesturing grandly at Leo, is a perfect example of why you have to be careful. He was fired for trying to harass Ms. Vance in her office. Pathetic social climber. And now here he is, trying to get close to her again. Probably hoping for a handout, the guests murmured, their eyes turning to Leo with a mixture of suspicion and pity. He felt the weight of their stares, the public humiliation a hot brand on his skin. He stood tall, his jaw clenched, but inside, his spirit faltered. He was overwhelmed. He was utterly alone. But he was not alone. That's enough, Marcus, the voice was calm, but it cut through the ballroom chatter like a shard of ice, commanding absolute silence. Isabella Vance moved through the parting crowd, her steps measured and deliberate, her eyes fixed on Thorne with a look of cold fire. She came to a stop beside Leo, a silent, powerful statement of allegiance. She was the hidden savior making her dramatic entrance. The room held its breath. "You seem to be mistaken," Isabella said, her voice echoing in the sudden hush. "Mr. Martinez was not harassing me. He was helping me." She turned her gaze to the assembled crowd of executives and board members. That night, he performed an act of unsolicited, selfless kindness that I have not seen in this company in a very long time. He offered warmth to a stranger without any expectation of reward. And for that, her eyes snapped back to a paling Marcus Thorne. "You had him fired," Thorne sputtered. "I was only thinking of your security, Isabella." "My security?" she interrupted, her voice dangerously soft. "You humiliated and fired a good, decent man to advance your own career. You embody the very corporate sickness I am determined to eradicate from this company. A culture that values ruthless ambition over basic human decency." She then turned to Leo, her expression softening. Her next words were for him, but her voice was loud enough for everyone to hear. "The anonymous donation that paid for your daughter's medical care. That was from me. The mortgage that was forgiven. That was me. It was the smallest possible repayment for the profound gift you gave me. You reminded me what it felt like to have hope. You reminded me what it means to be human." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The power dynamic had been completely, seismically reversed. Thorne stood speechless, his face ashen. Isabella wasn't finished. She looked directly at her board chairman. "Effective immediately, Marcus Thorne's employment is terminated. His promotion is rescinded. And his position," she paused, then looked at Leo, "is now open." She publicly offered him not just protection, but power. The salvation was complete. In the aftermath of the gala, the world realigned itself around a new center of gravity. Marcus Thorne vanished from the corporate landscape, a footnote in a story that was already becoming a legend within the walls of Vance Industries. Leo, stunned and disbelieving, initially refused Isabella's offer of a high-level corporate position. "I'm a janitor, Isabella, not an executive," he said, his voice filled with doubt. They were in her office, the same office where their story had begun. But now the heavy glass door was wide open. The sterile silence was gone, replaced by a comfortable quiet. "You are a man of profound integrity and compassion," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "Those are qualities far more valuable than an MBA. I'm not offering you Thorne's old job. I'm creating a new one. I want you to head the new Vance Charitable Foundation. I want you to take my vast resources and use them to help people, to find the other Leos out there and give them the support they need. Who better to distribute kindness than the man who taught me its value?" He saw the sincerity in her eyes, the desperate need to create something good from the ashes of her pain. He saw a path forward, a way to provide for Lily and to make a real difference in the world. He accepted, but the resolution was more than just professional. It was deeply personal. Later that week, as they sat on a park bench watching a now healthy and vibrant Lily play on the swings, Isabella turned to him, her expression tender and raw. "For 3 years," she began, her voice a soft tremor, "I lived in a fortress of my own making. I truly believed that love was a liability, that sentiment was a fatal weakness. I put up a sign on my desk and on my heart. She looked at him, her eyes glistening. But you, with your simple thermos of tea, you broke through all of it. You didn't just give me warmth, Leo. You gave me back my life. You made me believe in love again. Her confession was a quiet declaration, more powerful than any grand romantic gesture. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. You saved me too, Isabella, he said softly. You and your mysterious angels, she smiled. A true, radiant smile that reached her eyes for the first time. We saved each other. The romantic fulfillment was not a fiery passion, but a gentle, steady flame, built on a foundation of shared grief, mutual respect, and a profound, undeniable love that had grown from a single seed of kindness. 1 year later, the stately, cavernous mansion that had once been Isabella's prison of grief was now a home, filled with light and laughter. The heavy, ornate furniture had been replaced with comfortable sofas, and the polished floors were strewn with Lily's toys. The golden glow of the late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating the happy chaos. In the backyard, Leo was pushing a giggling Lily on a swing set, his face relaxed and full of a deep, settled joy. Isabella watched them from the kitchen window, a mug of chamomile tea warming her hands. She was no longer Ms. Vance, the Ice Queen CEO. She was just Isabella, a woman who had learned to love again. The face-down picture frame on her old desk now sat on the mantelpiece, but beside it stood a new one. A photo of the three of them, taken on a recent trip to the beach, their faces bright with happiness. The small, gleaming silver plaque from her desk was gone. In its place, propped against a vase of wildflowers, was a familiar, worn receipt, now framed. On it, the 5 simple words that had changed everything. Everyone needs warmth. Hope this helps. Leo came inside, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching Lily chase a butterfly across the lawn. The sterile silence had been vanquished forever, replaced by the soft hush of a peaceful, loving home. Their happily ever after wasn't about the wealth or the power. It was about the profound security they had found in each other. A family forged not by blood, but by the quiet miracle of a shared cup of tea on a cold, lonely night. They had healed. They were whole. This story, in its heart, is a fable about the immense power hidden in small, selfless acts. It reminds us that behind every polished exterior, every title, and every wall we build, there is a human heart that may be trembling, breaking, or simply feeling cold and alone. Leo's simple offering of tea was more than just a drink. It was a gesture of recognition, an acknowledgement of shared humanity that cut through class, power, and pain. It was a single candle lit in a vast darkness, and its light was enough to guide a lost soul back home. In a world that often prizes cynical transaction over sincere connection, this tale is a testament to the idea that the most valuable asset we will ever possess is our capacity for kindness, and the greatest return on investment comes from giving it freely, without ever expecting anything back. It is a story of how one man's quiet virtue saved a woman from her grief, and how her powerful resources, in turn, saved him from his desperation, proving that we are all, in our own ways, both the sufferer and the savior, just waiting for a chance to heal one another. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the light that kindness can bring into the world, please take a moment to reflect on its message. We all encounter people who are fighting battles we know nothing about. A simple gesture, a kind word, or a moment of empathy can be the lifeline someone desperately needs. It can change a day, and sometimes it can even change a life. The world can feel like a cold and lonely place, but we all have the power to be a source of warmth within it. We invite you to join our community of viewers who believe in the power of love, compassion, and redemption. Please like, share, and subscribe to Soulful Love Tales for more soul-stirring stories